Should I wait till it's 29? He's got
Yeah.
10 minutes on?
Go ahead.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today on the Happiness Quest. My name is Jess Dutel from the Center for Business and Community Partnerships at Plymouth State University, as well as the PEMIU Center, thanks to our Service Learning Partnership.
And I'm Dr. Maria Sanders, a philosophy professor at Plymouth State University and CEO of Philosophy for Life. And on today's program, we're going to be discussing finding our happy place.
I love that.
I actually brought a couple props for this too, because I actually have a number of happy places. But as I thought about in preparation for the show, what types of places I'm naturally attracted to, what I found is a lot of them have to do with nature. I like it out in nature. Yeah. And when we think of happy places, especially for the individual, it's an opportunity for us to step outside of the chaos of our everyday lives and have that break, that place of reprise. So I'm really going out on a limb here because I'm going to show you some of my own artwork, which I never do.
This is exciting.
Yes, I never do this, but I think they fit very well.
That's beautiful.
So this first one is actually a painting that I did when I lived in South Padre Island. Mm-hmm. And what I found as I started thinking about my various happy places, they tend to be not only places out in nature, but near water. I tend to like water. And when I look at this particular painting, what's interesting is it's not only a depiction of the ocean by South Padre Island, but I see a lot of other things here that aren't really painted into it. The dolphins that swim in the bay, the brown pelicans that are on the causeway as you go over the causeway, this very long bridge to the island, the scent of salt that's always in the air, is most beaches that's the case. So I would definitely say South Padre Island is one of my happy places, and whenever possible I go back to visit my happy place, even though I no longer live there.
So looking at this creates a sense of being there for you.
A sense
brings
of being,
you back.
It brings a lot of memories back because I did spend a lot of time on this particular island. And so it goes beyond just the space itself and has a deeper meaning in my particular life. And I think that's true of a lot of our happy places.
Yes.
We may be naturally drawn to a particular place, but what keeps it continuously kind of in our minds and that constant draw is it starts to have a deeper meaning. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later in the show. The Germans have a term for that, Bildung, which they talk about this community that almost forms around a particular place. And it doesn't happen with all spaces. It's a place where that occurs. So that's one depiction of nature that I'm attracted to. The other one, which this one's a little bit larger, so we'll see if that fits. But you'll notice here now we're away from the water into the mountains. I actually grew up in the Allegheny Mountains of Pennsylvania, which is a depiction of this. This is in the Allegheny Mountains. But what really drew me to this particular imagery as I was painting it, I've always been fascinated when you're in the mountains, and anyone here in the White Mountains region that spends a lot of time in the mountains will know that this is true. There's a very different feeling, a very different environment, so to speak, in the daytime in the mountains versus the nighttime. And I've always been fascinated the difference, not just with the plant life, the vegetation, the animals, but even for human beings, how it feels when the sun is up versus when the sun is down in the mountains. So this was actually a depiction right before the sun came up.
Wow, it's gorgeous.
Yeah, it was a time that I was in the Allegheny Mountains. I used to go out quite often before the sun came up or in the evenings. I didn't deliberately stay beyond the sun going down, but a lot of times I'd lose time and I would be there and then all of a sudden it just goes instantly dark. So it has a very different feel to it. And I absolutely love the mountains. In fact, it's something interesting to think about as we think about our happy places. The impact not only the place has upon us, but how it can continuously draw us back. And I don't know if you've experienced this in your life, but I know for myself, since I am very attracted towards nature, I find I have this constant draw towards water. So whether it's a lake, whether it's a river, whether it's the ocean, the bay, I find I like spaces near water. But likewise with the mountains, I grew up in the mountains. I feel like they're part of my roots, of who I actually am at my very core. And although I moved out of the Allegheny Mountains and did not live near mountains for at least 20 years, I always had that little tugging back to the mountains.
And here you are.
And I
back at the
I think it's
mountains.
almost, yes, full circle that now I've come back and I live in the White Mountains in New Hampshire. And I felt when I came up here for the very first time, I wasn't familiar with this region at all. I felt that peacefulness immediately.
Like you belonged here.
Yes, it's like this is a place I could live. This is a place I could easily fit and be at peace. And I think it was the mountains. I think it was the White Mountains.
Yeah.
So do you have places
beautiful.
like that have like intertwined in your life?
Absolutely. And first I want to say, I didn't know you were such an amazing artist.
Oh, well,
These are
thank you. And I'm
gorgeous.
not, but I love
Well, you are.
painting.
You are.
But I appreciate
So, and I always appreciate when I hear people talk about nature. I also admire nature from inside, looking out my window.
From afar.
Because I'm allergic to nature, quite frankly. And so
Can you be allergic to all of nature?
I feel like I'm allergic to all of life on some level. And I'm not sure what that means, but I do take an allergy medication every day. So even though I love being surrounded by mountains, and I love 72 degrees, no bugs, beautiful sunshine with big puffy white clouds, not every day is like that. And so
As we sit in June right now.
Exactly.
Yes.
So I spend a lot of time indoors. As my father would refer to me, I'm an indoorsman as opposed to an outdoorsman. And so it's funny because I have spent a lot of time these past 2 years creating my home into a space that makes me feel secure, safe, peaceful, and inspired. And that happened because my parents moved from my hometown in Lebanon and sold my childhood home a few years ago now. And that rocked me. Now, I should say, I am incredibly grateful that they moved because they're 10 minutes down the road. And that has been wonderful in terms of support with our children. But it was hard for me to say goodbye to this physical space. I felt like I lost something. And even now when I'm having a tough day, I will go within myself and visualize myself walking in the front door of my childhood home because that space felt so secure and safe, right? And just peaceful in my mind. And so when we moved from our last house, which was certainly a home, but it didn't necessarily have the same feel that my childhood home had, having had that space out of my life in some sense, I still drive by. I'm that creepy person that drives by really slowly and takes pictures to see, the upgrades. But when we moved into our new home, I was bound and determined to make our home that sense of calm and security that I remember as a child for my kids and also for myself. So what we've done is, as a family, we've decided on the colors on the walls. We stenciled quotes on the walls. And actually, when my children walk in the home, the first thing they see and the last thing they see before they leave is this quote, which reads, "In this house we are real. We make mistakes. We say I'm sorry. We give second chances. We have fun. We give hugs. We forgive. We do really loud." We really do loud, which is difficult sometimes. And we are patient. We love. And so I want that to be the last thing they see before they head out into the world, to remember who we are. We're grounded.
So it's
together.
like instilling your family philosophy in front of them every single
For
day.
sure. And then we surround ourselves with little trinkets that mean something, right? And also, this is something that I forgot. We have some green leaves, so this is going to look funny on the screen, but this is a piece of artwork that I brought back from Jamaica, and I have deeply rooted relationships and connections in Jamaica now. And so every time I see this, much like your painting, I'm brought back to that community, and I'm reminded,
that you're having.
yes, of those feelings and experience. So I think it's, it's a really important thing. It's become important to me to create our space, our physical space, as a reflection of who we are and what resonates with us and the most meaningful things to us, so that we have that experience together.
I find it interesting that you talk about creating this very peaceful, calm home at the same time that it seems like you were transitioning into letting go
Yes.
of what was that calm, peaceful home, your childhood home.
I tried to recreate it.
Yeah. Yeah. When I think about it with my experiences, although my childhood home is still something, my parents still have their, the home we grew up in, and I go back there and I visit, and it does bring a flush of memories whenever I go back. I have to admit, even as a child, I spent a lot of time outdoors. In fact, I had this very special place. My sister had always talked about it as Maria's place. It was across the street from where we lived, but kind of deep in the woods. We were out in the country, and it was on a road called West Creek Road because there was a creek, a river called West Creek, and it was probably about a mile in the wooded area across from where we lived. And beside this river, there was this one place that I was always drawn to, even as a young child. It had this large, it was kind of like a boulder that had been over time smooth on top. It was like sheared off on top. And I don't know if it was when it had fallen and broken or what, but it was kind of this really disc-like rock, but it was huge. And there was a second one a little smaller, so it had like this stacked two rocks. And that's where I would go and sit for hours when I was a kid. I wrote poetry there. That was like my thinking place.
Yeah.
I rarely took anyone to that place. And I never realized that until I was much older, that the only person I ever took to that particular location was my sister. And that's how she knew where that was at. But I spent literally hours on a daily basis by the river again, by the water. And I would play my guitar. It was a lot of creation, whether it was creating music, creating art, but it was a place that I felt very calm, at peace, creative in. It was just that place, and it drew me. It wasn't something that I sought out. And interestingly, now all these years later, I won't say how many years, living in New Hampshire, I found a relatively similar place over in Campton, Smart Brooks. Right by the Smart Brooks River, there's this little area that inclines. It has a rock, but it's a little different. And I didn't realize it until you were just describing kind of your childhood and letting go of your childhood home. It's almost like I found that place that was my childhood place as an adult.
Yeah.
Or it found me. I'm not sure which is the case. But I do find myself, I don't have nearly the time to just spend there as I did as a child. But I do every summer head over to Smart Brooks, and that's my destination. When I'm doing the hikes and the walks, it's always, I want to go to that place. I always spend some time
You're drawn there.
And then continue
As
the
a
hike.
child, I was drawn to our backyard swing. So even though I don't spend all that much time outside because of the bugs, as a child, I spent so much time on our backyard swing. And that's where I felt most alive and connected and creative. I mean, hours. And so when we moved into our new home, I really was determined to find a swing set for my children. And I thought about it. Within a week, we got a phone call from neighbors down the street saying, our children are grown. We're hoping to get rid of their swing set. Do you have any interest? Absolutely. So
the swing found you.
The swing found me. Yeah. So that's so interesting how we have these physical spaces in our lives, but they resonate so deeply on a personal level inside.
Well, and did your children take to the swing like you did?
No.
Yeah, and the
Not
reason
yet.
The reason I ask that
I love the
is,
swing now.
yeah, when I think about my happy places as a child and compare them, or I should say contrast them, with my 4 children, I would have to say that it's not the same.
Yeah.
In fact, although all 4 of them I have gone on hikes with, some it takes a little more convincing than others to get them into the outdoors. But when I think about like our home, I never had that direct affinity to a house, even when it was converted into a home. And I've lived a lot of different places by choice. Not, as a child, my parents never moved. So we had that white picket fence, one location. But I guess I always had a little of that wanderlust in me. And I liked the nomad life, and I liked moving from one location to another and creating that space.
And you just moved.
Just moved again, yes, across town now. And we're in the process of doing this once again, where we're creating, it's like converting a house to a home. You're creating that space into a place so that it has meaning and it fits. You're not just how you live, but how you feel in that space. But when I think about like my children, they're not going to have that one childhood home because they've moved. And they've moved from state to state. You know, we've been in the Midwest, we've been in the South, we've been in Texas, we've been in New England, you know, Pennsylvania. They've been in all these different areas, and not where they've just visited, but they've lived in all these different areas. And I always find it interesting when I ask them about their childhood home. You know, what does that mean to you? And in some sense, it's the experiences that travel, the consistency. We do have, like you brought, what you called your trinkets with meaning, your items that have meaning. We have an ever-growing amount of those items, even though when I say an ever-growing amount, we don't have a lot. But the things that we bring with us from place to place all have meaning.
And they increase in meaning, right? Because you choose them over and over.
Right.
I can remember when we moved across town, I had the opportunity to purge the things that I no longer needed.
Which there's a real value to that as well.
Absolutely, but the things that we did take increased in meaning because we chose them again to bring with us. And it's interesting listening to you talk about the sense of home and childhood place. What I realized, having let go of that physical childhood home, is that those memories and that sense of being in that space are carried with me. And so it's not just about the physical location, it's about the people. It's about the way you feel and the sense of being. And I still have that, and wanting then to create that for my children. And it's funny because my favorite space, aside from the backyard swing, was my playhouse that my dad had built me. And I played dolls for hours. He put in a loft, there was a front porch. And that was what was the most difficult for me to let go of. In fact, I went, just before my parents closed on that house, I went and spent some time in that space, and specifically in the dollhouse, which I called the dollhouse. It was very large. It was a playhouse, though. And my cat was, you know, buried in the backyard. There was a lot of sentimental attachment for me. And then when we found our new house, lo and behold, there was a little shed, a little barn in the backyard, and my eyes lit up. And I thought, this is the playhouse. This is going to be my daughter's dollhouse. Of course, my partner, Brian, was thinking, oh, I can park my tools in here and my tractor. And I thought, no way. And we created it into this space. And of course, this is one of those memories that resonates deeply with me that my daughter gravitates to as well. So that is our space together. And I think Brian thinks that once our kids grow up, it's going to be his shed. But we're going to have grandkids perhaps, and so it's always going to be this playhouse. But listening to you speak reminds me that even though we're creating our physical spaces, they remind us of this sense of belonging and being, and that's really home, right? And we can carry that with us, not just in our houses, but to work with us. Wherever we go, we can carry that sense.
Well, it's that sense that creates the meaning.
Yes.
And I mentioned this term a little earlier, Bildung. It's a German concept for education meeting community or place. And it's basically, if I can combine across cultures here, this German concept of Bildung always reminded me of an application of the ancient Greek concepts of time. Because the Greeks always distinguished between two types of time. They had a time referred to as chronos, which we have largely adopted, chronology.
Yeah, chronological time.
Yeah, so it's that simultaneous or in order time. And in our current society, when we say time, that's largely what we mean. You know, we're looking at the clock. We're measuring according to dates on a map.
Yes.
But it's chronological time. It's sequential. But the Greeks had another notion of time called kairos, Kairos. And this is the one that's always fascinated me, because this concept of time is an opportune time. It's the right time. It's not chronological by any means. It's almost like a coming together of experiences in a particular time, in a particular place. And this is where I tend to think of the Bildung concept of community that the Germans were trying to articulate. That when we think about these meaningful places that we end up calling our happy places, it's kind of like time stands still. We lose time, so to speak, because it's not chronological.
And you can transcend chronological time, right?
It's that you had these meaningful experiences at a particular time in a particular place, but it wasn't that time or that place necessarily that created the meaning. It was all this coming together. It was an opportune time.
I love that.
Yeah, and so that's why I think we're able to recreate, in a way, not the same experience, but you're able to recreate your playhouse because of this conception of meaning that you're still attached to from your playhouse.
Exactly.
And with that in mind, then, we can actually create our happy places.
At work.
At work,
right?
at home,
Wherever we go.
in our cars, wherever
Yeah.
we spend our time. So I think the first step is to think about, where are we actually spending time? Now, we may actually be spending our time in locations where we would rather not be spending our time.
Sure, like
That's
the car.
another show.
Right.
That's
If you have a long commute, you spend a great deal of time in your
Right.
car or on a train or on a bus,
Yeah,
right?
quite often our time
In
is
an
not our
airplane.
own, especially in our own
Exactly.
society. I may have to work a particular job because I have to bring that income home
Yes.
so that I can put food on the table and so on and so forth. So if I start to think about, well, where am I spending my time? Do I have the long commute? So really I'm spending my time in a vehicle or on a train or on a bus. Like, where am I spending that time? Am I at work? And if I'm at work, am I in an office? Am I in a cubicle? What does that mean to be at work? Or am I outside? Do I have the kind of job
Right.
that I'm literally outdoors? What do I have control over? So again, if I'm in my car, I have a lot more control over creating that space than perhaps if I'm on a bus.
Yes.
So in my car, I can actually select the vehicle that I'm in. I can reupholster seats if I want a certain color. I can't do that on a bus.
Sure.
Or I can program the radio into podcasts I want to listen to. But with today's technology, we can bring a lot of that with us. If I'm on the bus now, I can bring my
Yeah.
iPad. I can,
Right. You
so I
can
can still
listen to a
create
book.
my environment to a certain extent. But I think all too often, because we're tied into this chronological concept of time, we don't even stop to reflect upon the spaces we're in. We just go through it.
It's true.
It's very
Because we go
habitual.
through motions, right? And I feel like some days I'm on a hamster wheel just checking off my task list. And I think the days I move into intentionality and mindfulness, those are the days that I experience life fully. Other days I'm just surviving it or existing, bumping around trying to get things done.
So spending time rather than actually
Yes, but
emphasizing
reflecting
on it.
and spending that time intentionally has made a big difference in my life. And I've brought this sense of creating my space to work, so my office space. I've brought quotes and pictures, images of my children. Of course, I have all these things with me, but so as everybody, I bring pictures of my family. I have quotes all over. I think I put so many holes, please don't tell anybody, at Samuel Reed Hall on campus, but put so many quotes up on my wall to surround myself with things that inspire me and empower me, to put me in a good headspace and heart space, right? So my physical space certainly inspires how I'm feeling on the inside as well. And then at the PEMI Center, which has been incredibly inspiring for me in creating office space and home space, we have our youth participants put murals on the wall, their handprints are on the wall. Well, recently our associate director, Samantha Demond, she texted me one day and said, "Are you coming at your normal time?" And I said, "Yeah, why?" I felt a little unloved at first. She said, "Oh, I'm actually creating something for you. I have a surprise for you," because I always talk about how I want the youth center to be this all-encompassing, all-loving, nurturing environment for our youth. And so she painted on the wall this quote, "If no one has told you they love you today, know that we do and we always will." So when our youth walk into that environment, that physical space, they feel that sense of love that we want
that right off
them
the
to
bat.
feel. Yeah, so I could talk about this all day, Maria.
Well, you remind me, though, of a very interesting book. It was called Great Places. And I'm trying to pull the author's name here. Ray Oldenburg. That was his name, Ray Oldenburg.
On the spot.
He wrote this book called The Great Places, and it was about these places in our community. And the reason I think about it is when I think of the PEMI Youth Center, I think community, because it's so ingrained kind of at the core of our community here. But when we think about our communities, certain types of places tend to lend themselves almost a little more naturally to having deeper meanings. Bookstores, cafes, they become these community gathering places. Here in New Hampshire, one of the adjustments I had to make when I first moved here is our recycling areas and basically the trash dumps are community gathering
we all get together,
places.
yes.
Yeah, that was not something I'd experienced in all the places I've lived prior to here. And
you see your neighbors there.
Well, and it's interesting because it's beyond just happen to run into someone else who is recycling that morning. But like when I first moved, I moved to Campton, they had what's called the Thornton Mall. In Plymouth here, I noticed it's kind of on the little sidewalk area at the recycling where they leave items that really aren't trash worthy quite yet, but they're finished with those items. So it becomes this swap of sorts, a bartering. Well, it's not even bartering because you can take whatever you want. I never experienced anything like that in the various areas. And again, I've lived pretty much all the other regions in the United States. So this was very charming. This idea that you're letting go, like you have a trinket that this particular one has a lot of meaning to you, but if you have another one that doesn't, you want to let it go, it suddenly has that potential to have meaning for me. And it may be as simple as there was one item that we had picked up about 3-4 years ago at the Thornton Mall. I say we, my youngest son, he loves going to these little exchanges. And the item that he selected instantly gained meaning because of the experience I was having with him as we're sorting through, and he's lighting up as he sees this item that he didn't realize how badly we needed until he saw it. But it begins anew, in a sense. It creates another whole story around that particular object.
Yeah.
And I think that's the charm with these swaps.
For sure.
But when we think about a community like Plymouth, we have a lot of these deeply meaningful gathering places where you don't really go necessarily for the item that is the business draw. Like for instance, when I think about our local cafes, and of course, I love my my coffee and my chai in particular. So I have two favorites here. Monte Alto in Plymouth and Mad River in Campton are my two go-to cafes.
Love both
of
cafes,
them. But I have to admit, when I go to either of those, I'm not really going just for the coffee or just for the chai, even though it's excellent. If you've never been there, it's excellent. I go for that chance of running into
connection.
Yeah, the community. And even when you're there and you don't recognize anyone else in the room, there's a community.
Which is rare, I'm sure. Yeah.
But the community's still there.
Yeah.
That was that Bildung concept that the Germans were talking about. It's like something magical happens when you have people in a space that becomes a place.
Yes.
And so it's this drawing distinction between space and place.
Yeah, that happens at Hannaford for me. I cannot go into the supermarket without seeing somebody I know.
Very true.
And that is what I love about this small community. That even if I just need a loaf of bread, I know I'm going to bump into one or two people. We share this space together.
Right.
Yeah.
So as we wrap it up for today's show, I encourage you to think about the various spaces that we have in the United States and the potential that those spaces have to become places. Because ultimately, if we surround ourselves with happy places, it makes our task of being happy a lot easier.
I love it. Thank you, Maria.
Okay, thank you.